Happy Wednesday. Welcome back to Speak Out with Christine Yeargin. I am your host, Christine Yeargin, and I am fresh off of a vacation to the free, fun, beautiful state of Florida. It was absolutely amazing. Hopefully for those of you watching who aren't listening, well, I suppose you're listening, but you're watching it on YouTube instead of Apple or Spotify. You can see that I look like a bronze goddess. At least in my mind, I do. I think it's just a lot of freckles coming out. Anyway, speaking of Florida, today's guest is the 13th congressional candidate for Florida. She is President Trump endorsed. She has served our country. Thank you for serving our country. Anybody who has served our country. And she is now running for office, which is incredible. And I'm not allowed to tell you who to vote for in any state at all, but I can tell you that you better vote pro-life first, and pro-abortion candidates are not the answer. We have Paulina Luna from Florida today, and we actually have her husband with her, which I think is really cool. I ran into them, so I knew Paulina Luna, but I ran into her at CPAC back in February and happened to meet her husband as well, and she shared with Students for Life, we were filming some content, shared with us that she became, well, she was already pro-life, but she became really outspoken about her pro-life beliefs and really solidified her pro-life beliefs after a specific incident that happened, which I like to dub her very affectionately, no less, the crazy chicken lady. And we got to speak to her husband, who was adopted and also has a beautiful story of life. And I think it's an important one to tell. So their stories combined, I was really impressed with, and I was like, I have to have them on the show. I have to tell people their stories. So I want you guys to look her up after this, especially if you live in Florida. You can do your research on all of your candidates there, but see why President Trump is endorsing her and see where she stands on the pro-life issue, obviously from this podcast episode, but also do your own research. I think that's so important. You know, I can't tell you who to vote for. And as much as I would love to tell you who to vote for, I still think it's important for you guys to educate yourself and to do your own research on every political candidate, see where they stand, ask them the hard questions. But for now, it's not the hard questions. We're having a beautiful conversation about life. And I'm really excited to introduce Paulina Luna to you guys and her husband, Andy. You guys have one of the coolest, probably most pro-life stories I have ever heard. I ran into you both at CPAC, actually, and we talked a little bit about why you're pro-life. And when I heard your stories, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to have them on the podcast. It's really cool. I want to hear this more in depth. Let's talk about it. First, though, I want to hear how you guys met, because obviously I know you as a married couple, but how did you two meet?
You want to take that one?
Yeah, Andy always blushes. So we both joined the military. I actually joined 2 months before you.
Yep.
Yeah, I joined 2 months before Andy, so that was now 12 years ago.
Thank you both for your service.
Thank you. But I had actually met him through a mutual person, and I thought he was cute, and so I added him on Facebook. So when Facebook first came out, and it was kind of just Lance, we really only dated for a month and got married a month later, and then now we're here 12 years later, so it worked out.
You guys dated for a month?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was something like that. But
so when you know.
It worked out, though. Here we are, 12 years later.
Right. That's funny. My husband told me 3 weeks in that he was going to marry me, and I was like, yeah.
Yep.
Not happening.
Yep, you knew.
And I think he took that challenge pretty extreme.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell young women, too, I'm like, when you know, so don't deal with people that are not being nice to you, because, I mean, we're best friends before anything else, and we have a blast together, but a lot of, I think, young women especially, they set their standards low, so don't do that.
I agree. No, that's awesome. I love that story. That's really cool. I didn't know that. So Anna, your story is super, super cool about why you're pro-life. You were not always pro-life. You used to be pro-choice. You thought a woman should have the right to decide what to do with her own body. What is it that changed your mind and made you decide that you wanted to now be pro-life, and not only be pro-life, but speak out about the issue?
Well, I don't think I was necessarily fully pro-choice. I think I was more or less just on the libertarian mindset that probably the federal government should just kind of stay out of it. I was raised Catholic on my mom's side, and then Messianic Jew on my dad's side. So I knew God, I had the, I think, religious foundation there. But ultimately, really what it was for me is I was basically, it was kind of multifaceted, right? So like I was at the point when I was actually getting ready to go to medical school. One of my last courses that I had to take in college was actually a developmental biology course. And this course basically went through we used chicken embryos to basically represent and follow what would happen in the human developmental process. And so ultimately, my entire time that I was in college, which is, I think, a really good point to bring up, because what we're seeing now is that in college, there's this massive indoctrination campaign going on with young women, especially. You have, organizations like Planned Parenthood coming in and pushing an agenda. But I was in the science department. So a lot of the science department pushed evolution, really kind of, I think, replaced God with science, or, the theory of creation with evolution. And so I remember being in this course. And I remember basically having to operate on a fertilized chicken egg. And so I had to open this egg up. There was a chick inside. I could see the heart beating and everything. And ultimately what ended up happening was I had this glass scalpel. And as I was underneath my dissection microscope, and I took my glass scalpel and I went to actually cut off the limb of the developing baby chicken, I noticed that the actual baby chick actually pushed away from the scalpel. And when that happened, I still, like, even just talking about it, I have the visual in my head. But when that happened, I remember thinking instantly, if this is happening to a chick, imagine it happening to a baby.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me so much that ultimately what ended up happening is once the course was over, of which it was, I would argue, probably one of the best classes I took in college. But once that course was over, I actually ended up taking home the remainder of the chicks that actually survived in incubation. And at the time, my husband was actually deployed. And he was deployed, and I ended up hand rotating and incubating the rest of these chicks. It was 60 of them. And I hatched them, and so I think he thought it was kind of crazy because he called me. I had bins in my townhome, no backyard.
We were in a townhome. She had bins lining the living room.
And she becomes the crazy chicken lady.
Not
the cat lady, the chicken lady.
I was, and I remember my professor who goes, "Are you," kind of looked at me, was like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Yes, absolutely. I'm gonna take these." I realized, they're alive.
I'm sure.
I took them, but ultimately, I think that story is so important because, yes, I had this scientific foundation, right? And my entire scientific education process was basically focusing on the science. The science says, if there's life that exists on Mars, it's a single cell organism. We call it life. That's a big deal. But you have literally multicellular organisms here on planet Earth, and because of the fact that it's a child, they don't want to recognize that. So you have the scientific argument, you have the proof of it, but then there's also this religious argument, and I think that God was using that opportunity to really wake me up, and that's why I chose to eventually speak out on it.
I think that's so cool. Andy, what was going through your head when she was like, I have all these chickens at home? Are you thinking like, oh my gosh, we have to find a new place to live? Who is this woman that I married? I don't even know you. What were you thinking?
I already knew she had a thing for animals of all kinds. I mean, stray cat, any animal outside she tries to get her hands on. I'll just give her something to do, but I could tell it meant a lot to her, though. I mean, 60 chickens is a lot of chickens in a time. So it was. I remember that very, very well. That moment that she took all that home, I was like, wow, that really resonated with her. So.
Yeah, I took them home and incubated them during finals week, hand rotated them, hatched them. It was, it was a life-changing moment for me. I know people are like, it's just a chicken, but I was like, it's so much more than that. I'm telling you, the minute I saw the scalpel, the chick moved away from it. It knew,
right?
It felt the danger, and that visual, if young people could see that, if they understood what it means to have an abortion and they could see that, I think that would really stop a lot of this nasty rhetoric that's being pushed by some of these organizations that are so pro-choice.
Right. And you see that the chick was alive. That's something that I find interesting, that they had you dissect a live chick. I've been in biology class before, and we had to dissect things, but they were always dead already. So I guess the life aspect wasn't really there. You didn't really think about it too much.
Yeah.
But for you, they were alive and you saw that, like you said, the way they move away from the scalpel, that's crazy. And I feel like it's really sad that we've gotten to a place where, and this is nothing toward you, but that it had to be a chick. And I feel like we're not doing enough to tell young girls what a baby is and how valuable the baby is in the womb and what they look like in the womb, and that they do pull away from these abortion instruments that goes out. Do you think we're teaching young women enough today?
I think that there's a huge problem, not just with the education system, but culturally speaking. And I say that because there seems to be this emphasis in our culture and our society today that really frowns upon young mothers. It really frowns upon the aspect of having a family instead of a career. I'm in the firm belief that you can have both. And I think that you can absolutely be successful in your career and have a successful marriage and still be a mother. But that's not something that you hear a lot of. You see a lot of what Hollywood tends to glamorize and hypersexualize instead of, I think, showing the aspect of like what a strong woman could be with a child. And so you have that aspect, and then you have the aspect of our education system, which really has, I think, instead of taught children from a young age to adulthood how to critically think, you see a lot of regurgitation of information and how to memorize. So people aren't thinking about the 5, 6, and 7 tier impacts of their one decision. And then in addition to that, you have colleges that will literally invite in organizations like Planned Parenthood, for example, to host events, and they almost make it cool. And so when you are in an environment, psychologically speaking, where you have young people, especially very impressionable young women, they're not going to want to stand there and say, I don't agree with this, because they're afraid of what other people might think. So I think that as conservatives, as people that are pro-life, I mean, you might not be conservative, but maybe you're still pro-life, I think it's really important to make sure that you are setting a good platform and an example for younger women, especially because I guarantee there's probably someone listening to this podcast that either knows someone who's had an abortion, or maybe they may have had an abortion. And the fact is that the long-term impacts of that is extremely damaging and traumatizing for women, especially 20, 30 years later, when they're at that point in time, maybe just then getting therapy for what had happened. It's traumatic.
It is. It's absolutely traumatic. And there's a lot of regret behind it. And you brought up the fact that you can be pro-life and you don't actually have to be conservative. We see, or even religious. We see a lot of people who are atheists or on the left or agnostic, and they're also pro-life, which is amazing because you don't have to be conservative to value life. And I love that. But speaking of politics, I don't want to dive in too much because we're a C3, but you were recently endorsed by the most pro-life president in history, President Donald Trump. That's an amazing feat. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. I can tell you that it was really refreshing to see this past election that he was one of the first presidents in a very long time to speak in D.C. At the March for Life. I think that that's an incredible thing. But not just that, I mean, I don't believe that in general, like whether or not I'm running, I don't think that taxpayer dollars should be going to that. And not to freak anyone out on this podcast here, but I do believe that there's a certain aspect of this that is spiritual. And,
Absolutely.
when you have organizations like the Church of Satan advocating to people in Texas on how they can perform a ritualistic abortion, and they say that that's their religious right. Constitutional rights stop when it starts to actually physically harm another person. And so we get into the debate in our society and politically on what constitutes a person, a human being. And then that's where I think that the left has really been selective about their science. The same party that says believe the science doesn't want to talk about the science of what constitutes life.
Right. We have Planned Parenthood, who's involved a lot in politics, and you've kind of seen the back end of things and the behind the scenes. Is Planned Parenthood involved in a lot of the pro-abortion decisions that are being made in Washington, D.C. right now?
Absolutely. And they were largely responsible for the massive, massive smear campaign that was launched against now Justice Brett Kavanaugh during his confirmation hearings. I remember that I was actually in DC, and I remember walking by the Supreme Court and seeing platforms and podiums set up with people speaking, but the main organizers for that were Planned Parenthood. And so it's
Wow.
not just political, they're involved in the media, they are involved in Hollywood, they're involved in really pushing this culturally speaking. And I think it's disturbing because this is the organization now that Joe Biden has taken office that he's putting our tax dollars towards. And there was actually, ironically enough, there was an individual that I actually saw Breitbart report on. I think he was atheist, and he was definitely not conservative or Republican per se. He was, in fact, I think a very liberal Democrat. However, the one thing that he was against was the abortion industrial complex that Planned Parenthood has been promoting. So I think that a lot of people need to remind themselves that Planned Parenthood, one of their major sources of revenue are abortions. And we just saw what happened with the Justice for the Five. I mean, that video, if you haven't seen it, it will send chills up your spine. And the fact is that it was being suppressed on every single social media platform. So if this really wasn't a problem, why do they feel the need to suppress the information?
No, you're right. When it comes to the Justice for the Five, they suppressed it. Then they're still suppressing it now. I know Mayor Bowser essentially accused the pro-life advocate who found the babies of tampering with the bodies as a reason that she wasn't going to look into it. It's disgusting, the lengths that they're willing to go to promote abortion and to hide what it really is. When we were at CPAC, you told us a little bit about your story, and Andy shared about his too. Andy has a very unique story. And when I say you guys are like the most pro-life couple, I don't mean that necessarily in your advocacy, but I mean the stories that you have. And I don't know how to explain it, but Andy, your story is phenomenal as well. Share with us a little bit about why you're pro-life and kind of your background.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to. And it's funny how life works, how things in your life that, for me, I grew up with my story, so I didn't bat an eyelash at it. It was just the way I grew up. It was the way it was. But so I was adopted. At birth, and I have a twin brother. And we grew up with a family in New Jersey who is just incredible. My parents are absolutely amazing, and my twin brother and I are extremely lucky. So my biological mother, she had my brother and I from an unconsensual event, and she was very young, and so she actually left Texas, where my whole biological side of the family lives, and she went to stay with a friend in Kentucky while she had my twin brother and I. And then she went back to Texas.
In secret.
She was very young. And the only person that knew about all of this was my grandmother. And so I was about 23. Was I 23?
Yeah, you were 23 years old.
So this conversation. So obviously, Anna knew my whole story, and then it finally got to a point where
Hang on, let me interrupt you. So did you know your whole life that you were adopted?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep, that was never a secret. That was always just the way it was. Which, if there's anyone listening that has adopted children, I highly suggest just tell them when they're young, because it's not, it's not weird. I know who my parents are. They're the ones that raised me.
Yeah.
And so I was like 23-ish years, so it was almost 10 years ago. And she started having questions about, family, and she's
I was into genetics.
She's
at the
into
time,
genetics, and she's got her degree in biology, so just very fascinated with the science and all that stuff. And so it somewhat inspired me to reach out and ask my mom, who raised me, and say, hey, and of course I talked to my twin brother about this, and we went back and forth on how do we even ask mom, like, is she going to be sad or upset or anything that we want to ask about this, like, hey, do you know anything about our biological family?
Right.
And so we finally work up the courage to do it, And we did. And it was pretty cool because she was totally prepared for it. She was like, "Yep, no, this is the last name, and that's all I really have." And I was like, "Okay." So I brought that back to her, and so we started poking around, and we found a phone number, the last name, in the phone book, right?
It was the white pages.
Yeah, the white pages, and
So is Anna doing most of the investigative work, or are you doing?
she's helping.
I was investigator number one.
Yeah, in another life, she could be an investigative journalist because she's
Right.
really good.
Yeah,
Digging
that's
for
women.
information and all that
We're
stuff.
good at that.
So make a phone, and this is just amazing how life works. So make a phone call. So this older lady answers the phone, and I was like, "Hey, my name is Andrew, and I have a twin brother Matthew, and we were adopted out, some time back, and or actually, I didn't even say my name. I was like, "Hey, I'm looking for someone named so and so, and she adopted twin boys out." And I paused for a second, and there was a silence, and I was like, "Hello," and she said, "Is this Andrew or is this Matthew?"
Wow.
And she said, "You should be about 33 years old right now." And Andy, at that point in time, was like the waterworks started. So she was crying, he was crying, I was crying.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was amazing. It was really wild. So I was like, "Wow, I'm talking to my biological grandmother right now on the phone." And so we worked it all out. My brother and I, we went out to Texas, and we met them, which is so wild, meeting other people. I grew up my whole life with not being genetically related to my family. So then when I met them, it was like there were similarities between us, which was really bizarre to see. I mean, most people experience that growing up, but it was just incredible. It was just an amazing experience. So
was your brother on the phone with you?
My biological mom and my mom who raised me, they're best friends. They talk all the time now.
That's so cool. So your brother wasn't on the phone with you when you called?
Correct.
It was just Andy.
Was he too nervous to be on the phone, or was that just
a little more? He was a little more. I don't want to say reserved. Well, I guess reserved. Just a little more. What we were afraid of is getting in contact with a complete disaster of a family. You don't know what to expect. You're like, okay, we were adopted out for a reason.
Right.
What could be those all of those questions. We had no idea what to expect. Is this going to open? Is this going to be a problem? So he was a little more reserved, but I told him we made we agreed on it. I didn't want to make any decisions without him, so I wanted to make sure that we were both on the same page about doing it.
Sure.
Because this is something that, like, once you open this can, like, it's open. So
you can't close it. Yeah, absolutely. So you both have a relationship now with her.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So Andy, one of the things that you brought up to us at CPAC was the fact that when your mother conceived you or your twin, I guess, you were conceived in rape. That is probably the number one argument that pro-abortion activists go to. It's the easiest, most emotional one that they throw out there because people don't always know how to respond to it. But as somebody who is conceived in rape and your life is completely valuable, how does that make you feel that that's the argument that they use? And this is maybe a question for both of you to answer.
I can say, like, as a spouse, so, Andy has this incredible story, right? But it didn't just stop there. I mean, after he basically left home at 19 years old, 20 years old, joined the military, which is where we met, he then went forward to become, a special operator, which is, people talk about the Navy SEALs. They don't have anything on combat controllers. That's what he did. And then was awarded a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. So Andy won't say it, but I will. He's a war hero. And, that type of argument to me is just so surface level naive. I'm not saying that people don't experience awful things. However, he's done some incredible things, to include he literally has saved other people's lives. And when people make that argument, if you've noticed, it's never from someone that's actually gone through that. It's always from people that are speculating and saying, well, but what gives them that authority to speak on that? I can tell you that my other mother-in-law, his bio mom, absolutely loves him and his twin. And I can tell you that I love him and his family. So, like, if it weren't for her making that very courageous decision so many years ago, not really knowing what could happen, right? Like, she really had to trust the process of the adoption to actually even realize that she was going to carry these babies full term and then let them go, which must have been very hard for her as well.
Yeah,
I can only
twins.
Twins.
Boys.
I wouldn't have him today, and I'm very happy with my marriage. So.
Andy, what do you feel that that's the argument? Obviously, the pro-life standpoint is that the circumstances of conception do not determine a baby's value. Your life is valuable either way. Rape is obviously a horrific, horrific thing, and the man should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. However, it's either all life is valuable or it's not.
It's one or the other. It's one or the other. You can't have both. And you know, I can't imagine what my biological mom was feeling at that time when she, found out she was pregnant and whatnot. But I think a lot of people in most things in life, they're never more willing to sacrifice certain things than when they're afraid and they're in fear. And I think that's why you need to reach out. You need to talk to people. Always hear both sides of the argument. And I think walking into just a Planned Parenthood, or is just one side of an argument. You go talk to someone like I feel like you hear our story and you're pregnant and you wish that it didn't happen. You talk to somebody that's been through it, and I feel like everyone we've ever talked to about this, they make the right decision.
We've had to have those conversations with people, though, because I've literally had people tell me that I'm some like right-wing extremist that doesn't believe in women's rights and that like I'm an anti-feminist. I mean, like, you name it, I've heard it, right? But then I say, my husband is a byproduct of rape. And you guys don't deserve the judge, jury, and executioner on whether or not he has a right to live or not. And I can tell you that there's probably been one person in your life that you've come across that is a byproduct of an unconsensual event and or different circumstances, and they're never going to tell you that unless they are comfortable enough to say it. No one's going to go up to you and say, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm a byproduct of incest, or hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm a byproduct of rape. They're not going to say that. So don't judge people and don't talk about that when you really don't know the long-term impacts it may have on someone's entire life.
No, you're right. You're completely right. There's a lot of people walking this earth who have been conceived in rape, and they don't necessarily talk about it. So you don't know. And essentially what you do with that argument is say that their life isn't valuable and that they should have been aborted. And that's not an okay argument.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, either all life is valuable or it isn't. So Andy, when you met your mom in person, like I know you guys talked on the phone or whatever, but when you met your mom in person for the first time, like what was the first thing that you said to her?
I don't remember that because I don't remember the first. It was so shocking. I legitimately don't. The first few minutes, it was just so overwhelming because we look similar as well. And so when I showed up to the airport and she was standing there, I knew who she was.
So you didn't know what she looked like before that? Like, had you seen a
No.
photo prior to that? So you
No.
just saw her and you're like, that's me in female form. That's my mom.
Yeah. It was super, it was very surreal, but it was awesome. It was just so awesome. It just like meeting a long lost family member. I mean, it was pretty cool. I think it was way more emotional for her, I think, because I mean, she lived, I was adopted out at birth, so I don't obviously remember any of that. I just remember growing up in an amazing home and with an amazing mom and dad, and that's just my life, So I didn't experience any of those hardships, but I could see it in her, and it was, I think,
I'm sure.
I know for a fact she was worth it though. She's just so, I mean, she absolutely knows she made the right choice, and I've asked her that. It's hard for her to talk about it, but she's like so happy that we were just adopted out, or that she kept us. We lived.
Yeah.
So
whether a woman has chosen life and made a life plan and placed a baby for adoption, or whether they choose to parent or come up with some sort of co-parenting plan. I've never met anybody who says, I regret choosing life. I had my own unplanned pregnancy. So I know exactly what it feels like to be scared and alone and not know what's going to happen or if you're going to have support or not. I've been there. I've done that. I know what that feels like. So when you say that she knows that she made the right choice, I have no doubt, because that's essentially every woman I've met who has their baby. They're like, this was worth it. Whether it was adoption or otherwise. Anna, were you with him when he met his mom for the first time?
So I was not. That was something that him and his twin brother wanted to do kind of just on their own. And I totally get it, because that's like, that's a pretty incredible thing. And the fact is that he didn't just discover that he had one, family member. They have a massive family. And so he got to meet cousins and grandparents, and he found out that he had an older sister. Yeah, so like he didn't know all of this. And so that was something that they definitely did on their own. And I understand why.
Yeah. If you guys could say, and again, I want this to kind of be for both of you, because this side of the argument. A lot of people struggle with the rape issue and how to talk about being pro-life and without sounding insensitive. If you could say one thing to someone who is talking to a woman who has maybe conceived in rape, or maybe there's a woman listening who is conceived in rape, what would be the one thing that you say, having experienced the situation that you did?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a heavy thing that I think there's only a heavy response, I feel like is the way to drive it home. And I think you just have to say, if you abort this child, if you decide to do that, if you make this irreversible mistake, you will regret this for the rest of your life. And you will most likely seek therapy later on in life if you do this. I promise you that you can almost look at it as like a long-term investment. It's probably very difficult right now. These people, maybe you don't have a lot of money. Maybe you're like, how do I work and my career and this and whatever, it's going to pay out in the long run. It's going to pay out in the long run. And again, you will not be full of regret. So that's what I would say.
I'd have to say my response is probably a little bit different, because I to be clear, like when I was actually in the military, one of my friends was raped. She didn't get pregnant, but I know what she had experienced trauma-wise as a result of that. And what I will say is that, and then having talked to his mom, and then now being married to him and knowing from his perspective and just kind of seeing all the dynamics from an external perspective, that at your lowest point, it's going to seem like maybe your world is coming down upon you. But just know that with time, everything will be healed, and that abortion is a permanent decision that you'll carry with you, but that sometimes, even in the worst circumstances, there can be long-term blessings. And so what I will say is that, like, I couldn't possibly understand going through that. However, what I can say is that witnessing Andy and the love that his biological mom has for him and his twin brother, and seeing the joy that it's brought to the family all these years later, I couldn't see it any other way. And so just know that sometimes, even in our hardest times, it too shall pass, and that in the long run, I think that people that are going through those situations and circumstances will realize that it's going to work out for them.
No, absolutely. It's definitely a horrific situation, but there's love and support and healing, and the pro-life community is willing to rally behind these women and help them with whatever they need. That's something that we really specialize in. A lot of people listening to the show, and the whole point of the show is to encourage people to speak out on the issue of abortion, or truly any other topic that is on their heart that they're very passionate about. What advice would you give to somebody who's maybe hesitant on speaking out, or they're uncomfortable in the pushback that they're going to get if they talk about abortion? Because some people think that it's a controversial topic. I say it's not. It's not controversial because we're fighting for life, and there's never anything controversial about fighting for babies to live. There is, however, something controversial about wanting to kill babies in the womb. What is your advice for those who are looking to speak out?
I think that it's really important for young women especially to realize that no matter what you do in life, whether it's on this topic or something else, if you are standing up and becoming vocal for something that you really believe in, people are going to hate you either way. Okay, so
Yeah, they are.
you have to realize that at the end of the day, being true to yourself, being true to your true convictions, like when you have that feeling and you know it's not right, listen to that feeling, because that's, I think, your conscience telling you and guiding you on that right path. Whether or not you know, are religious, that is God working in your life and directing you. I can tell you that to date, I know for a fact that because of the fact that I chose to speak out on these issues, to speak out for what I believe in, that I know for a fact that I have influenced young women to keep their babies. I know that I've influenced
amazing.
young women to stand up, and that is in part what I believe that my purpose on this earth is to help kind of leave this place in a better condition that I found it. And so I'll continue to do that. But know that you're not the only one, and that there are many other women like you who believe this as well. You might just be the first one brave enough to step forward.
Yeah, I get a lot of DMs when I do talk about things that are considered bold to talk about nowadays, because they want to censor us, they want to silence us and shut down any opposition, especially the abortion industry. I get DMs all the time. I agree with you. Thank you so much for speaking out. I can't say anything because I don't want to lose my job. But there are so many people who agree. We're not alone. You're right about that. Andy, men are told no uterus, no opinion. So we're
Takes
not.
two.
Do what?
I said it takes two.
Yeah, it takes two to tango. And you know what? I always say that men's role is to protect their children. And these are their babies too. And they're supposed to stand up for their children, and what's right or wrong. And I don't think that there is a gender to a moral argument. Either it's wrong or it's right. You don't have to be a man or woman to see that. But there's a lot of young men who are scared to talk about it. What would you say to them?
I think, somewhat to Anna's point, I think I personally, I regret the things that I don't say more than the things that I do say.
Great point. Yeah.
If you don't, how many times do most people throughout their day, throughout their year, looking back in life, and they remember moments where they didn't say something and they wish they did. People remember those moments. If you ask someone, hey, what's something, tell me a story about a time where you wish you said something when you didn't. Could be about any topic. People remember those things. And so speak your mind. You're going to regret not saying it in the future. So.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
I was also going to say, to add in there, I think it's important too that if you are, a young man, and like I know I've met many friends who got pregnant and then the dad didn't want to be in the picture, but then their dad or their brother stepped in and stepped up to the plate. Do that, because you are raising up the next generation of men, and really men do have an impact on a developing child's life and in regards to security and how successful they are later on. So encourage men to get involved even at a younger age, even if it's through mentoring.
Yeah, I agree. You guys, thank you so much for coming on. I love that you came on, and as a couple, you have the coolest story ever, and I think that so many people will be so interested to hear it. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.